Welcome to Inside the Deal. I'm Suzanne Stevens. With me today is Paul Bird, and Paul co-chairs the M&A practice at Debevoise Plimpton and was also named a Deal Maker of the Year by American Lawyer magazine for the role he played in helping to hold together Home Depot's sale of its HD supply business. Paul, we're here today to talk about material adverse change clauses. And I know that the market conditions certainly disrupted Home Depot's sale of its supply business, but did a MAC clause actually come into play there?
Well, thank you, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be here. There were a number of factors that went into the renegotiation of that deal. As you know, it was signed up early in the summer of 2007 at a $10.3 billion purchase price. It ultimately was renegotiated in August of that summer for a price of $8.5 billion. Between the early part of the summer and the latter part of the summer, really, the debt markets did effectively shut down. So both the buyer and the seller had a number of issues they needed to resolve. And I think what held the deal together was an intense desire on the part of both the buyer and the seller there to complete that transaction.
We have seen MAC clauses come into play in a couple of recent deals, certainly ongoing with Hexion and Huntsman, and also in the Clear Channel LBO. Are we seeing MAC clauses used more than pre-credit crisis, or are we just hearing about them more?
Both. We're hearing about them more and we're seeing them invoked more, and there's a good reason for that. As deals fall into trouble, the first thing that a buyer is going to consider is there a basis here for calling a material adverse change? And recent changes in some of the deal technology, deal terms in the M&A market have made it, I think, a little bit more likely that a buyer raises that question, because if the buyer can prove that a MAC has occurred, they walk away from the deal without any penalty. In today's market, if a MAC has not occurred, they may wind up paying a reverse termination fee.
For companies that are considering M&A activity, buying or selling, and for those that have deals in the pipeline right now, what have we learned from the use of MAC clauses in some of these recent cases that might be helpful for those companies going forward?
Well, there is a recent decision, Suzanne, as you know, in the Hexion Huntsman case out of Delaware. That didn't make new law for us. All that did on the material adverse change front is reaffirm what people already knew, which is that in Delaware, proving a material adverse change is nearly impossible. The standard is very high. Even apart from the case law, though, the practice in recent years of including so many exceptions to the material adverse change definition itself has been a very high barrier for a buyer to get over if they want to assert a MAC. But what I mean by that is the practice has developed such that virtually every adverse event you could think of on the target business is now commonly excluded from the MAC definition unless it disproportionately affects the target business.
Paul, are there precedents being set now in the use of MAC clauses that will come into play in deal making once we return to a less volatile, more normal deal making environment?
Suzanne, what we're seeing are three developments that affect the conditionality of deals, and that's what the MAC clause addresses. The first would be an express closing condition that the EBITDA, the operating income or cash flow of a business, have achieved a specified level during the recent 12 months prior to closing. Well,
for a seller, though, that's not something you necessarily want to sign on to, is it?
Absolutely right. It's a reflection of the times. You would call that a pro-buyer development. There are two others that are in the same vein. One is we've seen the return of the old-fashioned financing condition. The buyer doesn't need to close if the financing is not there. Sometimes that's with a requirement to pay a reverse termination fee, and sometimes it isn't. The third and the last one is just an ability of buyers to extend the closing date, extend the termination date under the merger agreement so that they can try to find the financing in the market.
Paul Bird with Debevoise Plimpton, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
I'm Suzanne Stevens. Thanks for watching Inside the Deal.